Hey guys, it's Cashew. So we're talking about tanks today, and tank items and tank killing items and what we can do about them, what Riot might do about them. So I'm going to ramble a bit about the setup, like how we got here, so that everyone kind of knows where I'm coming from if you've listened to this video. So if you're thinking, what the fuck is this guy talking about? At least you can understand why I think what I think. So, over the last 10 years, starting in about season 3 or 4, we've seen a slow, consistent power creep of items. It's very small, but it's there. And at this point in time, items are now stronger than they were. There was like a significant lowering of power, especially of champions during the first couple seasons, but now things are just getting stronger and more synergistic. The durability patch was intended to make fights longer, make champions die in one or two more abilities or hits or whatever, and that succeeded. Mythic items Mm, everybody who's watching this video probably knows how much of a balanced nightmare mythic items were, where there was rarely an extended meta where multiple types of mythic items were the best thing in the game at the same time. But in general, the concept of the durability patch still existed. If you bought a couple items that gave health, if you bought a significant source of armor, you probably took like a full assassin's kit to kill or couldn't die to one rotation from a mage. If you were a tank, ideally you couldn't die to any one thing in just a couple seconds, no matter who it was or what they were doing, right? And now we're coming to the point where we have gotten rid of mythic items, and Riot's had a lot of time to optimize the current system. And in a lot of ways, I think they've done that. But they've slowly been peeling back one layer of power that players get as damage dealers, and that is the ability to kill tanks. So we're going to look at two items first, and then we're going to look at every single other item that I think is particularly relevant to the conversation. But the first thing we're going to look at is the AP items. Now, there's only two of them, only two items that you might consider tank killing items. Penetration, I'm not counting for the course of AP, because it's like, pen just works. Pen is the best thing you can buy late game. You should buy penetration. Purchase a void staff. Purchase a void staff. So we're looking at Leandries, and we're looking at Riftmaker. And I'll tab between them, but the core is that both of these items have a thing that says deal % bonus damage, and then they each have an additional reward for getting an extended traits. Leandries has max health damage, up to 6% per ability hit, but only 2% per second, and Riftmaker gives you Omnivamp, meaning that if something doesn't do a lot of damage, like a tank, then you can sustain through their damage. It's a kind of multiplier for the amount of time you're allowed to fight a tank as an ability power champion. Now, these things kind of work, and they kind of don't. The reason they kind of work is because they apply to different classes, right? Leandries is really good against, or really good for poke mages, champions that can consistently hit one or two spells over the course of a very long engagement, but can't burst people. Leandries gives them, these poke mages, a way to turn their flat damage from their spells into something that affects tanks. Riftmaker, conversely, allows AP bruisers to not get whittled down by tanks' large % HP pools, because AP champions don't otherwise really have options for damage mitigation, right? There isn't a lot of access to AP plus armor or AP plus magic resist, right? You either are buying a tank item, or you're buying AP items that give a little health, or you're buying Zhonya's or Banshees, which are both designed to deal with burst. Riftmaker is the item that bridges that gap. Now, my problems with this are twofold. One is that they both require ramp. Leandries doesn't give you the full damage boost until you ramp up. The second one is that they don't actually punish a champion for building an insane amount of survivability and no base damage. Is that a problem? Not necessarily, but I think it is for one specific reason, which is that Riot is working really hard to make AP champions do everything AD champions do, and vice versa, provided you're the right champion. Gwen is maybe the best example of this. Gwen is a character that just straight up is an AD bruiser, but she's an AP character, right? Like, Gwen is a vamp-focused, melee, mid-mobility bruiser with a reasonable amount of AoE, a ton of late-game damage and scaling, the ability to outstat anything given a little bit more gold than her teammates, the ability to push, and she really likes flanking, but she really hates walking into teamfights. Gwen fills a very similar role to, like, I don't know, Warwick or Briar or Jax, someone that just wants to go and go and go and go in, right? Obviously, she's not any of those champions, but there's a comparison to be drawn there. Ryze and Cassiopeia are battle mages. They want to do the same thing that mid-range AD carries want to do, right? Azir is your team fight DPS ADC, and all of these designs are things that have been solidified later and later in League of Legends history. And they've been given items to do so, right? The tuning of Rod of Ages and Seraphs to allow Rise to do what he wants to do, Cassiopeia to do what she wants to do, is specifically to allow them to hit the place where they can beat tanks and beat champions in their range, but not overextend it, right? These items don't have move speed for a reason. They don't have some type of scaling that allows them to mitigate ADC damage for a reason. But AD items cover a massive range of space, right? So only giving mages 2 options at all to deal with tanks is kind of rough because AD champions have so many. And we're going to get into that. But this is just an intro to kind of my thought process. This is how I think about tank items. It's rough that there are smaller options. It's rough that there are not ways for mages to make themselves like really tankier against a mitigation tank. Riftmaker's Vamp doesn't do much if it's like a Cassante who has massive damage mitigation and builds a ton of resistances, right? So there's holes in this design. Before I talk about any ways you could really fill these holes, let's go over the next items, which is going to be all the AD items. And I'm kind of going in a single train of thought here. So first, we're going to talk about things that exist in the game, but not the way we want them to beat tanks. And there's a couple items in this list. I'm going to break the full screen real quick just to look at them. But these are arena items. So we're going to look at Hellfire Hatchet and Hamstringer. Now, these items are tank killers in 2 very different ways. Hellfire Hatchet is the only item that doesn't work specifically for ADCs that we're going to talk about, and Hamstringer is an ADC specific item. So if you don't know, Hellfire Hatchet gives a little AD, some lethality, and a passive that gives a single large burn when you hit an enemy champion once every 20 seconds. Obviously, this is not designed... 15 seconds, sorry. Obviously, it's not designed to work in Summoner's Rift, but you can simply assume you would rebalance the burn, rebalance the timings. Maybe it applies once every 10 seconds, but it has a much smaller burn. It would have to have a smaller burn to work in the base game. But it's an arena item. Convert it to working in a 5v5 setting. Does it work? The answer is no, for a very specific reason, which is that casters in the base game, in Summoner's Rift, should not be able to easily kill tanks. If you have an AD caster that can kill a tank, you have allowed Lethality Varus and Zed and Talon to scale in a way they're not balanced around scaling. So just straight up, this doesn't work, and I'm not going to talk about items that don't give some form of attack speed, crit, consistent damage, some form of like tank-specific scaling for characters that are already designed to deal with tanks. If you are playing full Lethality Varus, you should not be good at killing Ornn. Cool? Cool. Other item, and this is the one that's like missing from the base game, is Hamstringer. So Hamstringer is arena specific, and what it says is you get 45 attack damage, 40% attack speed, 20% critical strike chance. I'm gonna move my camera real quick. And it has a unique, effective, passive thing where every time you hit someone with a crit, you have a 2-second bleed that deals a little bit of physical damage, not a lot, but it's based on the crit damage and a slow. So the slow is really small, but stacks up to 5 times. The bleed does not refresh itself. So if I attack someone 3 times in 2 seconds, at that moment, they'll have 3 stacks. And then if I don't attack them for 1 second, 2 of those stacks will fall off, right? The stacks all have independent durations. Now, does this work? Kind of, right? It is an item that specifically punishes low or mid mobility champions that can't get onto an AD carry in time, right? It gives ADCs an additional source of damage, it's delayed damage, and it slows these characters. The problem is adding an AD carry item that allows an AD carry to play a little more like a support, right? In this theoretical world, you could have Hamstringer apply 35% slow, and if you have Runeans, you could apply 35% slow to 2 or 3 frontliners at the same time. Even if that's just for a couple seconds, hand an AD carry a Rylai's is a pretty terrible idea. We removed Frozen Heart for a reason, and this would be a much stronger Rylai's. Obviously, even if you rebalance the stats, it's still an ADC item. If you take the crit chance off it, it doesn't work. If you take the AD off it, it feels awful to build. And if you take the attack speed off it, the item doesn't synergize with itself in a way that feels good. So it also would be very vampiric if it didn't have attack speed, because it would rely on you building probably 2 attack speed items to get any significant number of stacks out of it. Yes, that's even with Xerxes and Tempo in the game. So Hamstringer on its own doesn't work, but we can look a little more at it later. Next item that I want to talk about is the Collector, and this is an example of items that are intentionally not designed to beat tanks. Yes, this item says % max health on it. It only applies that % max health a single time. That's it. Lethality does not work on tanks, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is to say lethality in general does not matter for this conversation. We don't care about lethality items. We don't care about adding lethality to items. This is not the way you beat tanks. The reason that we don't do this is because of the way armor works in League of Legends. If you don't know, the formula for armor is pretty simple, and all it is that for every 1 armor, you have to do 1% more damage to a champion to kill them. If they have 1000 health and 100 armor, you have to do 2000 total physical damage to kill them. If they have 1000 health and 200 armor, you have to do 3000 total physical damage to kill them. Then, if they double their health, they have 2000 health and 300 armor, you have to do, or 200 armor, you have to do 6000 total damage to kill them. Lethality reduces that amount of armor by the lethality amount. So if you have a champion with 1000 health and 100 armor, lethality makes it so you have to do 1900 damage instead of 2000. If they have 1000 health and 300 armor, you would have to do 4000 damage. That lethality only reduces it to 3900. That is a very, very small amount of bonus damage, right? You could make that up with probably less than a longsword of AD, considering you're an AD carry and you're hitting a bunch of times, maybe using some spells. So Collector doesn't work on tanks. Just making sure that we all understand this is where we're at with flat damage. Flat damage and single application percent health damage doesn't effectively work. Here's what does. Oh shit, my bad. And it's Lord Dominic's Regards. So this is just the pen item. It gives 40% armor pen, 3580, and 25 critical strike chance. I'm going to say this is fine. So this is kind of a rough space to be in. Lord Dominic's Regards is a little weak at killing tanks. And you can tell because AD carries can take a really significant amount of time to kill a tank, even with this item. It also costs 3100 gold, which means you have to hit 3 items. So as an ADC, if you don't have this item and the enemy tank gets 3 kills and you're, 0 and 2, or well, fuck it, you're 3 and 5, right? And the enemy tank has just gotten more gold because they're in a solo lane. They have the bonus 1500 gold from being 2 to 3 levels above you in terms of raw stats. And then they just walk at you and you don't have armor penetration. You are going to not be able to damage them at all. That 40% armor penetration applies to the theoretical calculations I was talking about much more effectively than lethality. If something has 1000 health and 100 armor, it needs 2000 damage. You take armor pen, they only have 60 armor, so you only need to do 1600 damage. If they have 300 armor, you remove 120 of that, so they only have 180 armor, which means you only need to do 2800 damage to them. So that armor pen makes a huge difference, right? That 40% armor pen, instead of saying 40 lethality, which would only remove 400 effective health from them, it removes 1200 effective health. So pen is good, pen works, Lord Dominic's is expensive. How do you fix that? There are a couple things that you can do. You can spread Lord Dominic's percent pen across a couple items. And I'm interested in exploring this design space, but it's not something I think is a good idea for a couple reasons, and I'll talk about those in a second. The other option would be to make Lord Dominic's Regards a little cheaper, make it maybe 2800, remove 10, 5, 50, whatever, right? Rebalance the attack damage and armor penetration so that it's appropriate for the cost of the item, and then add a passive to Lord Dominic's Regards. Now, this has existed. This is why I was scrolled down here so I could go ahead and be on this. So Lord Dominic's Regards had a Giant Slayer bonus for a long period of time, and it allowed you to do bonus damage to a target based on your difference in maximum health from your champions to their champions. Why is this not in the game right now? Lord Dominic's Regards is supposed to be the tank killer item, right? You buy Mortal Reminder if your job isn't solely to kill the tanks or if you need heal cut, but if you need to kill a tank, you want to buy LDR, there just isn't a justification. This would do it. Why isn't it in the game? So, 2 reasons. One is that the durability patch has increased specifically the base health that every character gets and the health per level, and as a result, reduced the impact of health from items. So the difference in HP from being over-leveled with Giant Slayer versus something being under-leveled with tank items is really, it feels really negative. It's like, well, I'm ahead as Kaisa, and I'm getting punished for buying this Giant Slayer versus Mundo, or not Mundo. Mundo would always have enough health to trigger this. Maybe a Cassante, right? Because Cassante doesn't natively buy health, so I'm only getting maybe half this Giant Slayer bonus, even though my only job in the entire game is to kill Cassante because I have 2 fed mages on my team or something, right? And that kind of brings us to the second point, which is this Giant Slayer bonus damage doesn't affect mitigation, and it doesn't specifically reward you for just hitting one tanky ass fucker. There is an extended problem here, and If you are playing League recently, you might have thought about this, which is that Mundo is miserable to fight as an AD carry, and he really shouldn't be. A big health stat stick with no mobility spells should lose to AD carries at 5 items. Not on their own, tanks should always beat ADCs in a 1v1, but if you're in a team fight as Mundo, and the enemy AD clicks you for 10 seconds, you should either have to run away, die, or your team should do something to play around it. You should die given enough time to be hit by an AD carry with 5 items, and right now you don't. Giant Slayer adds a little bit of damage, but it doesn't actually reward you for hitting the enemy champion the same time over and over for an extended period of time. It also multiplies the carries damage, which means that at 3 items, LDR is less of a spike than it might be at 4 or 5 if you run Giant Slayer. Ramble over about LDR specifically and about this Giant Slayer passive. We're going to look at Bork now. If anybody who is watching this video has heard me talk about AD itemization in the past couple of years, at some point you've probably heard me say my ADC should have just bought a Bork 5th item, because sometimes they should have. Right now, that's bad and you shouldn't have done it. Bork currently has a 6% target current health damage. It used to have a 7 for ranged and it's been higher. The stats on it have been slightly better. Right now it's a little weak, but for maybe the prior half a year before this, it was really weak. And you would often see people say, oh, just buy a Bork, and Reddit or Twitter or some pro player would just clown on them for it. Like, no, that doesn't fix the problem. And they're absolutely right. Bork doesn't fix the problem. But it's the closest thing in the game that we have right now to something that works on tanks specifically. So, if you don't know, Bork has 2 passives. It gives some AD, some attack speed, and some lifesteal. So remember, Riftmaker is an item designed to let mid-range battle mages, in and out battle mages, extended fight battle mages do something versus tanks because they have healing, because they can't get mitigation from armor and magic resist. Bork is doing something similar in that it's giving lifesteal. Not the same, but there's a design comparison there. It does % current health every hit, and when you hit something 3 times, it becomes slowed with a cooldown. The slow tends to make Bork slightly better, even as a first item when champions have lower mobility options, maybe fewer points in their mobility spell, maybe they don't have their ult, they're not saving flash for big team fights, and you just die to Bork. Like, you just die to the Bork active happening, like Twitch presses are from outside your range and you die. That stinks, and it also means that that part of Bork's passive doesn't work on tanks. It doesn't really do anything to tanks, right? What do tanks here if they get slowed for 1 second? They're already expecting to be hit for 5 or 10. And that kind of zones into the biggest problem with Bork, which is that when they've buffed it recently, they did buff the current health damage by a little bit, but they also buffed the attack damage on the item. And this other passive, this slow, is taking a bit of Bork's power budget, as is the lifesteal. It can't do what ADCs want it to do, theoretically, because there's too much power budget in things that don't kill tanks. Right now, you shouldn't buy this item as a tank killer because it's not a ranged tank killer. It's for melee champions to buy something that works against health stackers, health scalers, and late game tanks, but put it in their inventory early and not feel bad about it because it still gives AD and it still gives that slow, so they still have a tool to jump on people, gank, use their flash and feel rewarded, that kind of thing, right? 2 more items, I think, that I wanted to talk about. Oh god, I keep hitting that button. 4, actually. Okay. So, we've got Ginsu's Rageblade and Yuntal Wild Arrows, and these fall into the space that I am thinking of as close. So, Ginsu's rewards you for extended... Oh my god, I can't hit the right button, I'm so sorry. It rewards you for extended engages. It gives 80 AP and attack speed about in equal amounts. It gives a small on-hit, and it gives you stacking attack speed up to 32 additional %. So that is almost 60% attack speed on an item, which is an absurd amount. That's a lot of attack speed that's really good. At maximum stacks, you apply your on-hits a second time every 3rd hit. So every 3 times you attack, you get 4 on-hit effects. Ideally, you combine this with 1 or 2 tank-killing items to get additional damage. Now, or additional damage specifically on tanks. Guys, this doesn't work. Stop doing this. The specific reason this doesn't work is because Bork isn't good right now, but the other reason is we talked about multiplicative stats earlier, right? The idea that items, 80 attack speed and crit all multiply on top of each other, armor and health multiply on top of each other. Ginsu's is its own multiplier, but it's the only multiplier available for on-hit effects besides penetration and attack speed. Attack speed, Ginsu's once, and pen, is way less than the attack damage carries options of attack damage, attack speed, critical strike chance, infinity edge, which is an equivalent to Ginsu's Rageblade, and armor penetration, right? So don't try to use flat damage to beat something with multiplicative scaling. 15 flat damage items, whatever, like 15 flat on hit is way less effective than 10 AD with some crit chance. Make sense? Kinda, yes, no? Okay. Because Ginsu's and on-hit items in general are less focused on stats, they also don't help with your abilities, and even if you're a crit-based carry, champions do currently have enough power put into their abilities that ADCs still want AD, right? Like, Vayne is still happy to get the AD for her Tumble, Jinx, her Zap ratio, and her Death Rocket ratio are both really good, so going Ginsu's to try to kill a tank is missing out on all the things that make ADCs good. Please don't do it. Oh my god. F11 to close the full screen. And now we're getting to, we're almost there. So Yuntal Wild Arrows is very close to the best thing to reward an ADC for hitting a tank. It's also just one of the best items in the game, if you're allowed to build it correctly. Yuntal has a very high win rate on champions that like Yuntal, when you can buy it first and not grief yourself. It has a punishing build path, but you need to build it first or maybe second, because that you need to be able to go into a lane and auto attack a bunch to get the crit up. If you don't have the crit, Yuntal is a significantly weaker item, right? Well, so Yuntal Wild Arrows has 55 AD and 35 attack speed. If you compare those stats to Bork, oh my god. If you compare those stats to Bork, just note, it's 15 more AD and 10 more attack speed. Doesn't have the lifesteal, but it has 25% crit. I would tend to value crit over lifesteal, especially if you can get lifesteal in the ADC tree, you can't get crit. So maybe Yuntal's winning out there, especially once it finishes its item. Once it finishes stacking. This is just a huge amount of bonus stats. Yuntal Wild Arrows' passive says launching a basic attack grants you 30% bonus attack speed for 6 seconds, reduced by once on hit and 2 if the attack crits. So, to be clear, that means that if over the course of 6 seconds you go 6 seconds around the clock, right? You have 24 seconds remaining. If you attack at 2 attacks per second and they're all crits, which is not unheard of for an ADC, provided you're allowed to attack that whole time, you have a permanent amount of bonus attack speed. Permanent 30%. This item says 55 AD, 65% attack speed, and 25% critical strike chance. That is crazy. Phantom Dancer has no AD on it, a little move speed, and it's cheaper, and it's viable. So, this item is only good if you're allowed to attack a lot, because attack speed is only good if you're allowed to take an extended fight, right? If you're just autoing once or twice, attack speed doesn't do all that much. It just makes you a little safer because you can get out of your attack animation faster. But if you're allowed to hit 10 times, maybe the attack speed lets you hit 12 or 13. So that's a total 20 or 30% damage multiplier, right? 2 or 3 more attacks over those 10 attacks. But it doesn't specifically reward you for hitting champions with mitigation. It doesn't specifically reward you for hitting high health champions. And it doesn't do anything if the champion you're hitting is very tanky and also mobile. And I'm aware at this point, if you're still watching, thank you. Also, some of you may be thinking, what about those Jaxes that just buy Randuin's Omen, right? What about Gwen, who just doesn't take damage because of her W? Well, Gwen you can't do anything about, but Jax, champions, bruisers that happen to buy 2 or 3 armor items and make you lose while also doing enough damage to kill you and your team. Let's talk about it. We'll talk about it as soon as I finish going over these last 2 items, which is Experimental Hexplate. The second item that's close. This item is the wrong stats, but something that we're looking for as AD carries. It's very similar to Yuntal Wild Arrows in the fact that it is a total of 40 AD, 50% attack speed, and a bunch of movement speed to help you kite, but it gives health instead of crit. It gives it ultimate haste, which we don't necessarily care about as backliners, and overall the stats are positioned wrong. But the idea is that you gain a large, DPS-focused steroid for 15 seconds after pressing your ult. Imagine if it was good. Imagine how good Sivir would be with this. Imagine starting a fight by pressing R as Varus and then saying, oh yeah, I activated Ghost. Without Ghost. That's crazy. That's an insane amount of power to give to these characters. And I think that's part of the reason Hexplate hasn't been moved into an AD item or copied to some degree in an AD specific item. And the closest we've gotten is Yuntal Wild Arrows, which does a guaranteed weaker version of this with ADC specific stats. But this is what I'm looking at, kind of, right? And finally, I'm going to talk about Kraken Slayer. So, Y'all probably know Kraken Slayer as a relatively bad on-hit item. It's like fine for some champions' first item. It's been powerful. It's been very powerful. By far best item sometimes for champions like Lucian or Kai'Sa. But right now, I think it's very fair to say Kraken's one of the weakest ADC-specific items in the game. Partially that's because on-hit is struggling, because on-hit isn't as good against tanks as other options. Guys, please stop buying Gensus versus tanks. I'm begging you, just buy crit. Anyway, Kraken gives you a 3-hit passive that does damage based on the target's missing health. That's cool, but if you can't do the damage in the first place to lower a tank, if you're playing against a tank who's getting his own shield, if you're playing against a tank who has an enchanter nearby, you're never getting value out of that increased damage. And that's, again, just like LDR, why I scrolled down here. Because Kraken used to say on it, I don't know where it is, right here. Consuming stacks, so activating Kraken Slayer's passive, on the same target within 6 seconds increases the damage by 50%. It can stack up to twice, for a maximum of double damage. This is the other closest thing we've ever gotten to an item that specifically rewards you for hitting the same champion over and over. I'm gonna be real, this is pretty cool. I don't know how much I like this, because it incentivizes tanks to back out of the front line. It incentivizes ADs to not change targets in favor of continuing to hit the tank. But the idea of an item that ramps up just because a target is there, regardless of the circumstance with which that target is allowed to stay. Is he sustaining? Does he have 1,000,000 armor? Does he have a bunch of health? Is he just going untargetable every few seconds? Thank you, Jax. Thank you, Fizz. Thank you, Vladimir. Yeah, doesn't really matter. This always works. Giant Slayer doesn't always work. This always works, right? So, how do we make something that always works? And this is really, really hard. And this is the reason that Riot hasn't added something like this, because they don't know exactly what they want to do. And they're really scared to rock the boat. If y'all thought about, think back to Season 8, if you were playing at the time, 8.11, they absolutely gutted ADC itemization, and the game went to shit. There's a lot of people's least favorite patch where they played AD or not, because Bruiser Soup bullshit was the best thing in the game. And right now, it can kind of feel like Bruiser Soup bullshit is becoming the best thing in the game, because ADCs aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Back then, that was the same problem. ADCs couldn't kill tanks, they couldn't scale, they couldn't deal with the front line. And as a result, the best thing you could do is just buy 1 or 2 tank items, invalidate any sort of DPS they had, and play some sort of, melee minigame focused bruisery comp that still did enough damage to towers to win the game. So ADCs are not there yet by any means, but they're getting there. And AP champions, now that Leandries has been bonked in the head a few times, are kind of moving that way as well. And we're often seeing situations where things like Mundo and Sion are just miserably frustrating. Right? Okay, again, that's not necessarily true. So the last thing to bring up is the bias. And I'm going to say it. The bias is low elo bias. Tanks are killable. In fact, tanks are very killable. They are killable right now by backliners of all types. The problem is that to kill a tank requires coordination. A tank is part of the trifecta. Tank, DPS, support, right? That's like the video game trifecta. You see it in World of Warcraft queues, you see it in League of Legends, you see it in Overwatch, you see it in every team game ever, right? You see it in solo games where you have a party of 3 or 4 people. You want a tank or a survivability character. You want a support that buffs things, maybe a second support or a damage dealer, and then either a third support or another damage dealer. But that's the idea. That's what you do, right? That's how you play these games. It's a team game. People don't play around ADCs like they're a team, but they're happy to play around tanks because tanks go in and make space and are scary and you can capitalize on it. It's not fun to not capitalize on your own things. And that makes tanks feel broken when they do work, because, oh my god, Ornn just pressed W 3 times, ignored all my CC, hit 5 brittle procs on me, ulted to split my team in half, and then he just walked out at 50 HP after taking 5,000 damage, and there was nothing I could do about it. Because I'm playing, I don't know, Xerath or Vel'Koz, right? Like an artillery mage. I'm playing an enchanter. I'm playing a frontliner without significant health damage, right? But if you play around your AD carry, Jinx will always do enough damage. You know, if you go into a practice tool and break it down, even if Jinx is only doing 200 damage per hit to a full defense Ornn, at 5 items, she's probably doing those hits at least 2.5 times a second. If everyone around your team is focused on separating the backline from Ornn and putting Ornn in front of the Jinx, Jinx will do half of Ornn's health in a few seconds. She's built to do that. If she doesn't do that, she's probably behind in items. If she doesn't do that, she is probably just not building correctly. If she does that, Ornn has 5 armor items, and either he dies to, a rumble with Leandries and Riftmaker, or you've built your team wrong. Or you just didn't draft for late game. There are always contingencies to deal with these things in the game. And that's the other reason that Riot probably hasn't added something like this. They look at pro play. They look at win rates. They see that Mundo and Sion are weaker in high ranks where you have champions that can and will punish tanks. You look at all sorts of shit in this game, and everything tells you, except for the players, the win rates in low to mid ranks, and constant clips and complaints and frustrations, everything tells you that tanks are okay. If they were to be less okay, and I do think they're a little too strong right now, what would we do? So, this is just from the ADC, AP, but especially AD perspective, right? How do you make it feel better to play against a tank? So, there is one more item that I think is worth talking about. I didn't pull it up originally, but it's called Reaper's Toll. So, if you don't play a lot of Arena, this is another one of those prismatic items. It's like Hamstringer. It's way too powerful intentionally because you don't get it consistently. Reaper's Toll is a bunch of attack speed, some move speed, a little bit of adaptive force, and it has a unique passive called Reap. Basic attacks apply a stack. Every stack, you deal a small amount of true damage, plus a percent per times you've hit them with Reap of the target's maximum health. Additionally, Reaper's Toll reduces your maximum health for the remainder of the arena round. For every point of damage you do with Reaper's Toll, Reap removes that part of your HP bar up to 50%. Obviously, that's broken. We can't put that in League of Legends. Oh god, we can't put that in League of Legends. But we can look at Reaper's Toll because it's successful. Reaper's Toll feels good. People like it a lot, and most importantly, it actually works. AD carries can kill Maokai, they can kill Mundo, they can kill Sion with a Reaper's Toll. What does Reaper's Toll do that allows it to be an ADC purchased item that kills tanks without being the most broken thing imaginable? Well, scales only have max HP for the majority of its own damage. That's one. It gives move speed. This is important. This is the second thing. Much like Bork giving lifesteal is a big deal, much like Riftmaker giving lifesteal, and much like Phantom Dancer, Runeans, buying tier 2 boots, all these things let you get away from tanks, Reaper's Toll lets you get away from tanks. That is a big deal. Move speed is a survivability stat for ranged champions. Thirdly, Reaper's Toll does true damage. Now, true damage is scary. Percent health true damage is really scary, especially to put on an item. I think every single time something like that has been done, it's been retracted because it was a massive mistake. But it's worth noting that percent health true damage lets you deal a lot of damage to tanks who decide to pivot into buying mostly damage mitigation. So 3 armor items plus ninja tabis, right? It doesn't do anything about shields or recursive health. But that's what the stacking damage is for. If you have shields or recursive health, the Reaper's Toll will still eventually start punishing you. And finally, Reaper's Toll has another line of text that I didn't mention, but you could have seen on the page, which is increases all attack speed gained from all sources by 25%. Obviously, that's too strong, but Reaper's Toll gives so much attack speed. And that means that even if you buy Reaper's Toll and then fight a team in Arena that isn't tanks, you have so much attack speed from the item that it still feels good. At the same time, the attack speed isn't really broken, because to use the attack speed, you have to create a situation where you're not being crowd controlled by another character in a game mode where everyone's got 10 million damage and low cooldowns. So, yeah, you should get rewarded by getting to do 1 million damage to them. How do we balance all these things into an item that actually works? So, there's a couple options. Obviously, like I mentioned, Experimental Hexblade and Unital Wild Arrows having specific sets of uptime that is very strong is really interesting. There is some basis for items that do something similar to Black Cleaver. Maybe you you can, instead of LDR, you can buy an item that removes like 2% armor per time you hit them, but every time you hit them and remove that armor, it also makes them take I don't know. Right, the idea is having some sort of stacking thing that either replaces LDR or is an alternative or whatever that allows you to do significantly increased damage over time to the same target without getting punished for doing what Kraken Slayer does and switching targets quickly, right? Because if you attack 3 times on Ornn, attack 2 more times, and then switch targets to Fizz for 1 or 2 hits to make him go away, you've lost your Kraken Slayer ramp and you have to hit him 9 more times to start getting the full Kraken Slayers again. Again, this is from the old Kraken Slayer that I was talking about, where it had the ramping on hit every 3rd hit. The second option I see is an item that does something similar to what Riftmaker does for ranged champions. Don't give it the survivability. It doesn't need to be a mortal shield bow, and it definitely doesn't need to be a mortal shield bow with some sort of also ramping option. But it could be something with a survivability ramping option. Maybe you could allow Bork to trigger more consistently but not slow, only give move speed. That way it's less punishing early game, you can balance it a little more for ranged champions as a result, and it lets them kite in a team fight without having to feel like they need a Zeal item, boots, something in their kit, and Jesus Christ praying them down to make sure Mindo doesn't one-shot them. So something like that can work. Now, the downside to this is that if an ADC gets too much move speed and too much lifesteal, they're unkillable, right? ADCs balance this very fine line where the moment that consistent, unmitigatable DPS hits a breakpoint and heals you, they just take over the game. And that's been the problem that Riot has been trying to solve with ADs for so long. That's the reason they gutted them in Season 8, because they needed to figure out how to make ADs more fair, and I do think they succeeded. Finally, have an item like Yuntal or Hexplate that doesn't punish the enemy for being hit, it rewards you for hitting an enemy, or for doing a thing. Have an item fulfill a condition that gives you an extended buff, maybe even a stacking and refreshing extended buff, something like Ezreal's passive, where it triggers. In fact, you could have it take the place of Kraken Slayer. Every 3 hits, gain 10% attack speed stacking indefinitely. Yes, that's just a second lethal tempo. No, I don't think they should do exactly that. I'm just voicing an option. It probably shouldn't give attack damage, because you don't want to have a reason for casters to attack to get the maximum benefit out of their abilities. That's just not good. You don't want to incentivize alternative game plans. You could have the item give increased, maybe this is the best thing, critical damage. So every 3 hits gain increased critical damage up to a cap, 10% up to 40 or 50% or something, right? Take the place of IE? I don't know. Something along those lines would probably be really valuable for making ADCs feel like they have a way to beat tanks. Because the most important thing is that what I said earlier about team and tanks and ADC setting them is true. Regardless of what you give an ADC, if they're allowed to hit a tank 12 times or 15 times to stack up that item, they're probably already doing a ton of damage. They just don't realize how much of it isn't related to the new item they've bought. And placebo effects are a really important part of designing League of Legends items. A really small amount of Yuntal's power is in this passive, and this stacks really quickly. 125 auto attacks actually isn't a lot when you're hitting waves. You can get this much more quickly than you might think. Go into a practice tool, hit some waves with Yuntal at level 8 or 9, and just watch how quickly it stacks. So, placebo makes a huge difference, right? These stats, the 25% crit, 35% attack speed, and 55 AD, matter a lot more than this. But this feels good. It feels extra. And giving ADCs something that feels extra, that hits tanks, even if it's just old Kraken Slayer, even if it's just Giant Slayer, is going to make a huge difference. I would love to see what Riot does over the next half a year for AD carries, because I'm really expecting something to change regarding at least 1 or 2 of the items I just went over, and maybe for something new to get added. I'm always a fan of more items getting added to this game, just like that AP thing I mentioned all in like first minute or 2 of the video. There just aren't as many items in this game as maybe there should be. There's like a more limited number of options. It makes it much easier to balance, of course, but at some point, and Riot has started moving towards this, design should take place over balance, and balance can come after design. Just nerf stuff during the Worlds patches, man. It's okay. Solo queue can be a little bit imbalanced. That's it. I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on this if you watch this long. Thank you so much for watching. I love this shit, and I would love to talk about any or all of this video. Tell me how stupid I am. Tell me how amazing I am. I don't care. Tell me my ideas are right, wrong. Talk to me about your own ideas for these items, right? Talk to me about what I might have missed, other items you want to hear discussed. I don't know. It's all great. Thank you so much, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.